From the grand lobby of Saginaw's former post office, where history was once stamped, sorted, and sent on its way, comes a show about the people who keep the Castle Museum running like a well-oiled machine. Welcome to Postscript, the podcast that delivers the stories behind the exhibits, the laughter behind the scenes, and the passionate folks who keep this historic landmark buzzing. Today we're hearing from one of Saginaw's favorite people and a man who honestly needs no introduction. Let's see what he's got to say. Well, welcome to this week's Postscript. And today we're talking to somebody who probably needs no introduction, but I will let him introduce himself and tell us his title here at the museum.
I'm Tom Trombley, Vice President and Chief Historian, and I'm a member of the team at the Castle Museum. And we all work together, and Catherine and I have been rambling on about research
That's
questions.
Right. Great outtakes from this episode.
Which is really, as I laugh oddly here, because research is like that, isn't it?
It is. You run across some interesting things.
You know, what's so different with working with local history, as we both know, is that you don't open a textbook and find everything there. It really requires using very unconventional techniques. Yeah. And sometimes we feel like when we have research questions, we almost feel like used car salesmen, because we have to explain to people why this shows what they are looking for. You can't just open a book. A photograph might have in a detail that is so important, but so easily overlooked. The one we discovered for our upcoming exhibit was a photograph of Saginaw's, what we believe is Saginaw's first Chinese restaurant, the China Inn. And you know, when I wrote the post and researched it and discovered it, I realized we don't have a photograph of it. I read the newspaper description, and I needed a photograph at a very specific time of Genesee Avenue. We have a lot of photographs of Genesee Avenue. Of course, none at the exact moment we need, as we're talking about using yearbooks and photographs. And then I realized that was about the time of the flood, one of the many floods that inundated Saginaw. And there it is. A clear view of the restaurant. But you have to look, and you have to go in, you have to convince everybody, no, you don't want to look at the really interesting moving carriage. You don't want to look at the really great photograph of the Eddy building down the street. Nor do you want to look at the Frank and Sam lunch counter. That's at least what we think it is. What you want to look at is that little sign there that is a document of a restaurant on the second floor. And we don't understand the ventilation system or how you get food up to the second floor in a building that probably wasn't served by an elevator.
We'll probably never know.
We never will. Oh, we have ways, don't we?
That's true.
Yeah. We have the Sanborn fire maps that show excruciating details and those overlays of years. So, you know, sometimes we're just sitting there looking at stuff and inventing stuff. We were chatting before about a research question we had, and I was going to say we do not have a photograph of the house in question. And then all of a sudden I realized, I believe we do. And so this is going to be a shorter podcast than we intended, because I want to go up and find the solution.
No, I mean, like, that's one of the things that I have definitely picked up from working here and from, you know, doing stuff with you, is that, like, you really have to look closely at photographs. All my background research was really in, like, government documents. And so it's a close reading of documents, but photographs are something different. And there really is, sometimes you don't pay attention to what's in the background, but sometimes that's the most useful
thing.
Detail.
And the other thing, in government documents can be read in different ways.
They can indeed.
It really is how it's viewed, and there's really all different type of resources, and sometimes you have to bracket it. Sometimes you're never going to find exactly what you are looking for, but you'll find it by comparing and going back and forth. And that's why I have a paper storm in my office all the time.
I'm sure it's totally organized.
No, it is not.
So, Tom, tell us how you got to be chief historian here at the museum.
Just kind of the same way. I had the first job it wasn't the first job I had. I had planned on going to law school.
Oh.
And I realized halfway through college that I really had not made a decision I was happy with, but just kind of pressured on. And I did an internship at the county, and I really did more and more realize that public administration wasn't really what I wanted. I can tell you about 1970s employment rules and stuff that are so different than today.
I bet they were.
The whole idea of smoking in an office today is, and I'm smoke sensitive, so it really was. But just think. And so I had an internship here, and I was the intern who didn't leave. And that's how I didn't end up going to grad school, because I had worked my way up to being curator here through attrition more than anything else, and perseverance. But really, just working with Saginaw history. Of course, the museum, when I worked here in the 1980s, was not a stable institution like it is today. It was a boom and bust cycle, more bust than boom. We had no regular source of funding other than memberships, grants, and donations, probably in that order in many years. So by the late 80s, when I think it was 88, when we had an unsuccessful attempt to pass a millage, I needed to find another job. And so I went into nonprofit housing. But it's interesting that some of the skills we talk about, research skills, are the ones that I used there. And I mean, property research is something that I was very good at. And I must say, sometimes the computerization of records has cut back on some of my ability to find things. I always love to find lost easements. It is really, it really is. There are forgotten easements.
Wow,
I had one. I worked quite diligently. The title company didn't solve it. I did.
So how did you become Mr. Saginaw? You know everything about Saginaw history.
No, I mean, I really don't think I know.
So people believe.
People, and I always am very honest that I don't. I mean, it's through talking to people and learning. I learn from you with government records all the time, which are something that we need more of.
I don't know if the government needs more records.
We really are just rambling here when I say more government records. And I know we've both become addicted to the online version of the Saginaw News through this library.
You can really get lost.
I mean, I would never have thought I'd be able to find how many servants people had. You can tell people who were had difficulty finding their servants when houses were sold. I had a hopeless case and found an ad for a house which included a photograph. It's grainy, but it's a photograph.
Right.
So I count that as a win, even though it may be unrecognizable. It's a win. So it's just really through learning. I mean, I view, last Sunday we featured Grace Sample McClure, and one of the things, and I hope it was clear in what we put together, but, and maybe I'll go back and rewrite it and do a second recipe. But I mean, one of the things she stressed was just, you don't stop learning. You go through life learning, adapting. She became state librarian, politically appointed positions being what they were, an and the governor changes and your position changes. Or else you adapt to a new party. My grandfather did that once.
They usually clean house.
So often if you're good enough, you can work your way around it. And so, but she came back to Saginaw and did, she never really left Saginaw, but she came, continued her career, and then the last thing she did was called a reassurance program. She was in her late 70s, and it was a call system for those who live alone in the morning and evening. And I don't quite understand all the mechanics of it. Sometimes we have to, we're production. We can't,
Right.
We have to leave stories behind when we're just getting interested in it.
But it's a good concept.
It is a really
However
good concept. It was a wonderful, I just don't know the mechanics
Yeah.
in 1960s. And one of the things I really, when I was researching that I never had realized, she had been the vice chair of the Committee to Save the Weber Home. And, and what was interesting, she had been one of the, I'm always careful, never, as we both are, never say first, one of the earliest female school board members, and had been very much, very interested in delivery of service, but also the cost of delivery of service. She was, she was a paper and pencil person, as well as a very feeling and very caring person. And so the school board was the one that owned the Weber home and was the one that really controlled, in the end, the failed attempt to save the house. And she, I'm certain there was some wincing probably in the school board offices when she decided to become vice president of that committee, which is really something I'd love to need to learn more about. So that's why we'll have to feature another part of her if we get another article about her.
So obviously you have many Saginaw history interests, but what is your favorite thing, either in the museum, artifact-wise, or about the building, or working here?
It's not having to choose a favorite. Remember, I said I never have a first, I never have a favorite. One of my favorite artifacts in the collection is Meyer Brothers Jewelry Store. It's probably the largest other than the building that we have, but it's something that has so many different levels of history to it and ways to interpret it. It has, it's beautiful. And it's really, I wish we had the whole front and the ceiling, but it's what we have is sublime. And it really, I realized when I came back here in 2019, put that 19 in, I was right instead of the 20, didn't I? When I came back, I thought, this is me just loving the early 20th century in this space. But I had a Cub Scout tour I was leading, and one of the Cub Scouts just screamed in delight when he walked into that, because he felt it had nothing to do with him wanting to buy a piece of jewelry for his mother, being interested in the fact that all the glass was made in Saginaw, that the mahogany was imported in what had been, for the city that had been the lumber capital of the world, that it really is prefabricated, slides together, and really goes along with that whole industrialization and prefabrication. But what it was just that being transported in time.
It really is immersive with that whole
setup. It's immersive. And and it isn't a setup. It is really it. I mean, but no, that's one of the things that I had this question.
It's unusual to have the whole, fabricated thing like in there, because normally it's like you're trying to recreate what it might have looked like.
What it might have looked like. And I've had people, when I've been giving tours, have come in, you were able to set it up like it was. There is no choice. That is what it was, yes. And it's also unusual that a jewelry store, rather than being an additive project where they were adding on cabinets as they needed them, would purchase something, and 40 years later they made some changes. They had survived a couple of disasters and fires next door. They had some water damage, but they really hadn't altered it, that it was so satisfying. And if anybody's listening to this and the location of the Meyer chime clock, you can find my telephone number or email address easily on our Facebook page. There's a photo of it. I've done articles on it. Someday it's going to come back home.
Someday it'll resurface. You never know.
You never know. and it didn't keep very good time, which
well.
by the 70s.
So what do you think about around Saginaw, all these older buildings? So certainly some of them for a long time, like the Potter Street Depot, they've been working on saving for 40 some years, I think, that group. But some other buildings, there's the WSGW building down there that there's kind of been, question, should we save these things? Should we redo them? Should we tear them down? Like, what do you think about all of that?
I think that I'm not going to go on record on any particular building because I love buildings and I can't,
Sure.
and a vacant lot is painful, but I'm going to, and it is. And there is, and if you listen to my longer lecture about communities, whenever you demolish a building, and a building that is destroying another building or is blighted, does sometimes have to be removed. But every time you remove a building from a street, from an urban streetscape, it creates a gap, and it's like dentures. If you don't put a plate in, everything shifts over. In this case, sometimes they do shift, don't they? And the next one comes down. Sometimes demolition isn't always within the boundaries. So, every building that's lost is not just a loss for the community, for that building, it's a loss for the community. And once you create a gap in that urban wall, it really takes away that ability to walk. One of the things, some people complain about parking, and we don't have a parking problem down here. You just walk, but the thing is, when you walk by vacant fields, it's not like training for a marathon that you're running through farm fields. You're going by areas that feel uncomfortable. So I know the WSGW, which is the Bliss Mason Kahan WSGW block, which was designed by Ludwig Belusin Buddha, who was one of Saginaw's first professional architects. There were other early ones, but he taught a whole generation of architects through his drafting class at the Germania. And it was described as a beehive of activity. One of Saginaw's first, if not first, telephone exchanges was in the building. It's just amazing how much history you can fit into 150 years. That said, it is a very challenging building. I know that the DDA has, or I think it's the DDA, either the DDA or Land Bank, there is a project right now to, I think they're going up for bids, for RFPs, for development.
Sure.
So, that is. And the one part interesting about that the two lower buildings on either side, so one is the Boz grocery store, which was originally I always get this confused. People say, well, anyhow, it was a bank. There was a savings and loan in a bank. And I always think if somebody passed away and you said, I have an account, don't forget about it, People's, they wouldn't know which bank to go to. It's just a thing. And the other side, those were actually part of the original composition. And originally the floors were elevated slightly off the street in an age when probably keeping above water levels.
Right.
Not kidding about that. But but we really didn't take into account accessibility issues. So even by the mid-20th century, or the first part of the 20th century, the first floor had been lowered and the sidewalks had gone up a bit. So it's kind of an interesting part. So there's a lot of stories there. So I applaud. I understand the challenges of trying to rehab a building, what can happen if you leave a blighted building, but I also know what happens when you move a building. And it is, the Saginaw is a city of half the population that was when I entered into this. Well, I was taught in grade school, we're a city of 100,000. Now we maybe can say we're a city of half that amount, if we're exaggerating.
Yes.
And I always thought that 100,000 was, because it was between censuses that we said it. But, you taught those when you got young. We were right over 100,000 by this year. We were like 90s, in the high 90s.
So one last question because we could talk all day.
Yeah.
But
I'll never
have other things to do.
I have a recipe to write. I have a this to do.
So as historians, we're used to kind of looking backward and trying to figure out, what happened in the past and telling those stories. But what do you think Saginaw's future is going to hold?
I don't believe in crystal balls.
Have your magic 8-ball out.
No, I think that there's a lot of things. There's a lot of positive things that are happening. And I think Medical Diamond, the development things, I'm thrilled to see a restaurant open again in the Bancroft.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've gone from we've gone from the coffee shop to the Flamingo Room to the Logmark Room to some other things in between, and now to the Bourbon Bar. And so now you can go to Gordy's and get in the space. And so, being able to walk around and do that. So Saginaw will never be the lumber capital of the world again. Our ancestors took care of that.
Right.
And so, it's about people, but it's about people interacting with where they live and the spaces that they inhabit in the community, and really the streetscape is our set. There was an interesting piece I read recently, and I can't remember her name. It would be Stanford White's, I think, great-granddaughter was an author and editor, and a book that I need to read, the condensed version in her obituary, condensed down one of her theories. One of the things she was passionate about was understanding the way we're shaped by our landscape, and then we reshape our landscape, and then it reshapes us. And I think in the case of Saginaw, that really is a really something we try to tell here all the time, and even accidentally, that there's two ways to tell. There's so many ways to tell the lumbering story, and one is really the vibrancy, the bravado of it in the story, but also really how horrible it was to work in lumber camps, and how horrible it was, and what happened to the landscape, and that it wasn't Saginaw itself. I mean, we cleared the pineries of Michigan, and they didn't become happy little farms. They became now nice areas to go on a summer day, but they're not huge stands of timber like they once were. And there was no farming, no successful farming in between, although we do have receipts from one of the Saginaw Lumber Company farms. And when you go out to the location where our office was, where the land office was for the lumber company. And then, so then we use that. There's that whole part after that where the river, where I've been laughing all week by saying from workhorse to racehorse for the river, because really that is what happened with the upper parts of the Saginaw River when you get up to, when you're south of the city, when you go, I think I'm directionally challenged, but I think it's south of the city beyond Ojibway Island towards Bridgepoint and the Shiawassee and the Tittabawassee, that there's a period of intense recreational use that really, after the lumbering, you couldn't have had that during the lumbering period, because, I mean, they were crammed with logs and were stuff. And then, it's just, there's the whole flooding. I mean, and that's probably connected. It's not just connected to the clearing of the forest. It has to do with the reclaiming is not a word like first we should use, the floodplains, which were the Prairie Farm, that it really changed the water flow. When we were talking, as we were talking about here, as we were talking before we started, or maybe we are going to include our chatting, I don't know.
You never know.
This, Catherine. I will edit it. But one of the things that we talked about was how the area around the Grove and Lake Linton, and really how hard it is, even when you walk around there, it is hard to, with a map from the 1870s, it's hard to figure out where your feet would be in the water and when they'd be above water. It's hard with the Ojibway Island, because it wasn't really an island in the 1930s. And it's even hard dare we give away who our featured artifact is on Saturday?
Oh, I don't know.
Sagina's was in the mid-20th, in the 1930s and 40s into the 50s. Margaret Carlin Conrad, who was who's purported to be America's, and she's always careful to qualify that there's no other registered dredge operator. Right. So she was very aware, and as was the newspaper, that you're always going to be wrong if you say first, and you're going to diminish the quality of what is really an accomplishment. But one of her projects was dredging the Turning Basin on Ojibwe Island. Also, she did a project where they built dikes, and that whole northern end of the island, which really isn't part of the original Rust Part deed, that when Season was going to construct, that's a whole other story. We don't have an hour and a half here. I mean, I don't fully understand. But there's always so much more to learn, as you know.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to turn the table. What's your favorite item in the collection?
My favorite item? There are so many interesting things in this collection.
That was very close to my answer. And you forced me to come up with an answer.
I mean, well, first of all, there's all the things on display. But then if you walk next door to the annex, it's like every shelf has got something interesting on it.
One of the things that I always, and when I do exhibits, I always try to take care of, but one of the things I feel guiltiest about is, I don't wake up in the middle of the night feeling guilty, but I try to overcome, is the fact that sometimes just being able to look at an item and understand it, and you have to convey that to people, because obviously if there's a fragile scrapbook that you're going through, if we have people thumbing through it, that isn't going to last long. And actually, one of the projects we've been trying is to do more digitization, and I always can never say that word. And it's one I always, from my vocabulary, always choose what you don't do well. But we recently acquired Lizzie Merrill Palmer rings. Lizzie Palmer Merrill rings. That was a terrible mistake. Edit that out. I know you can't. My apologies, listeners. Garden Journal, and it was kept right up to the time she passed away in 1912. And the page that I find most poignant is one of the last ones where she's drawn a little schematic of the southeast corner of the garden, the pavilion, and she's put ink and pencil dots in denoting where plants have already been planted, where scilla and jonquils have been planted, and where they should be planted. And she was very ambitious with her pencil dots, which were the future. And that was for all we know, was accomplished. She would pass away in December and never see the results of her planning and labor. And it just really reminds you of just the continuation of things, but the way that what we leave behind just leaves such a record of our enthusiasm, our challenges, and why I should never try to say digitization. And what we've done is, and it's not quite finished yet, but we've, in conjunction with the library, have scanned that journal, and so it will be available for everybody. It's a pretty esoteric piece, but it was so fragile. And I've done a lot of research on the garden, I overcame my enthusiasm and did not touch it and decided I was going to scan it first before I did any research with it, because I didn't want to I didn't want to damage it in doing research. But it's useless to have a worn leather book that is not, the contents can't be shared, and they are wonderful if you're into gardening. So with that, I have things to write. You have things to do.
Well, thank you, listeners, for listening in, for tuning in, however you're watching this.
And there's a more important thing that our listeners need to do. That is to come down to the museum.
Absolutely. See Tom in person.
Or see Catherine in person.
Or not. I like to hide out.
Oh, no, I do too. Or just come down and see what we work on.
That's right. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for chatting today.
Well, thank you.
And in another 2 weeks, we'll have a new episode for you again.
This is Postscript.
I just don't know. I've got to go shopping and I'm just not looking forward to